I tried not to cry for Dean, but I'm broken now, so I cry a lot. I make sure that I don't get on here if I'm going to be whimpering like that because I can't speak. So let's continue. All right, this is about Rory Jepson, and he Deuel County, Nebraska. I'm not sure if any of y'all have ever heard of it. Probably not. The main town is Chapel, Chappell, and the second biggest city is Big Springs. Big Springs was once robbed by, what was it, Jesse James, I think. So, like, that's their one claim to fame. They had a robbery back in the day by some famous bank robber. So, the town's not famous, the bank robber is. Surrounding towns, however, well, Big Springs as well, is also in a lot of old westerns. 9 a.m. There's going to be another one that goes off at 9:11 and another one that goes off at 9:14. Those are my alarms. Important dates. So Rory Jepson, he primarily collected Native American artifacts, and some of the artifacts that I showed him, he asked me if I got him elsewhere. They weren't artifacts that I got elsewhere. It was just broken rocks that I found, and legit broken naturally that way. I believe either that or somebody was learning how to do something called napping. I'm not talking about taking a nap. I'm talking about napping stones. That's where they take one stone and they strike it against another stone and they basically flake off pieces. That's the way cavemen made knives. Um, a lot of the stuff that he had in the area, he knew what was supposed to be there, he knew what's not supposed to be there, and he found a couple of obscure things of his own. There was a couple of scrapers that I found that he was pretty sure were not from the area. He was pretty sure the stone wasn't from the area. But he's also the first person to sit down and give me like a really in-depth guide and study on these rocks. He said, all right, so a lot of you guys, you're of the opinion that, natives never went anywhere, or a lot of people are of the opinion that, like, native folks never went anywhere and that trade here in the Americas was not widespread before white men showed up, much like we tried to believe with Stone Age people over there in Europe. We're coming to find out that that's absolutely not true. One of the first giveaways that we had was the fact that nearly all of the stones that we're finding are not native to an area. Some of that could be, glacial runoff, things like that. You get a big old glacier and it wants to crush rock and move rock and push rock. And of course, if it's really high, it's going to move often. The thicker the flow, the more the flow is actually going to move. It keeps on compressing itself and pushing itself flat. Kind of like if you take silly putty and drop it on the table as a ball. It's going to slowly stretch out until it's flat. Now, there's a lot of stuff with that. Rory was able to point out where different rivers used to be and were in the area. Some of them that were dried up by the time he was a kid, but they used to be there. Now they've been plowed over. It's not a river or a creek or anything anymore. But he said that it used to be a seasonal floodplain, and there was two main things that happened through that valley, and that was, of course, the Buffalo Run. You've got millions of buffalo that run through there every year seasonally, and you've also got the floods that run through there seasonally. Well, now we control the flow of those rivers, so we don't have those floods. They still happen. Um, those floods are important, though. They're important for everything. They're important for bringing in different nutrients. A lot of those stones, they got iron. Iron's important for our growth. It's important for our plants' growth. Even if you're a vegetarian or a vegan, you still need that iron. And for Rory, he was showing me stones that he's like, I'm pretty sure that this style here is from over here. He's showing me stuff all the way from like New York, Maine, places like that. And he's like, all right, now this stone right here is for sure from Mexico. This is the only place you're going to find this kind right here. And he wants to tell you everything about that particular one and where he found it. What a lot of people don't know is that he's got a set of ledgers. Whenever he went out, he would get permission to go out looking and searching. And when he found stuff, he wrote down where he found it. If he found an arrowhead, a Clovis point, something like that, he'd write it down and which direction that it was facing in. That requires having a compass. Well, not in Deuel County, Nebraska. There's north, south, and east, west roads. So you pretty much always know which direction is north, which direction is south, which direction is east, and which direction is west. Those are pretty important map markers because, well, there's a lot of inbred folks there. You have to make it as simple as possible. I don't mean that to be rude, but it's a simple fact. We'll get beyond that, right? So those ledgers of Rory's, they don't just show the artifacts where they came from. They also show the daily life. I mean, he's got like boxes and boxes full of flakes. What flakes are, or flecks, is they take a rock and when they're trying to make an arrowhead, and sometimes use a piece of antler or bone for this part, and you'll flake off pieces of your stone, like your flint. Some of the first mines that humans were known to have were flint mines in Great Britain. Since then, we've found that there were flint mines all over the world back during the Stone Age. When you have access to something like what Rory had, you've got something that we're really not pushing as much as we should. I mean, the Europeans, they push their heritage, they push their culture, and they try to push Native American culture a bit more than Americans do too. But what we're not looking at here is that there is an entire unwritten history that is still factual and fact based. That that rock that come from Maine, if it come here on an ice flow, it wouldn't be. Nebraska's a lot higher in elevation. Sure, maybe there's some cataclysmic events that made rocks move all the way from Maine to Nebraska uphill. There probably have been times where there's something similar like that. I mean, we got the pushing of the mountains upwards and all that, but geographically and as far as, the time lapses that we have, there's no indication of something like that would carry those rocks all the way to Nebraska. We've got situations where we've got 14 or 15 pound fish that tornadoes or wind gusts picked up out of the water and dropped places. We've got even a few pictures of that happening in recent day. I can't remember. I want to say last time it was frogs. But it's not a plague. It's just, you got a lake full of frogs. Tornado picks up them frogs, and tornadoes don't last forever. They eventually stop. Frogs have mass. They're gonna drop. They got way too. And so, of course, with Rory, we're not going into, rare occurrences like that. You guys could probably look them up on the fact finders on your YouTubes or whatever. Lots of cool stuff, but some people might want to pretend. Now, the rocks that he was showing me that were for surely from Mexico, it was a yellow rock. It's about that long. It's very yellow, and it's got like little black flecks in it, and it's got, I think, brown ones as well. But he was telling me that the only place in the world that they have that particular rock is a particular part of Mexico, and that there's no way that the flows through there, especially since it was made. That would have had to be well before the Rocky Mountains were ever formed, and that was part of his argument. He said this is proof that they traded all throughout here. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think it's some pretty good tangible evidence. It also shows the family life and the family structure, much like the Hispanic culture that I love so much, and the native culture up there in Hardin, Montana. I'm not going to pretend that every native culture that I've been around has been like that. That's because, well, other than visiting Hardin, Montana, because I got stuck there because it was cold and I was out of gas. Other than that, most Native Americans that I lived with, I just knew them from school, or I knew them from places that I was placed, foster homes and group homes and the like. But they have an entire history of their own that really, I think that is one of the greatest parts of American heritage. We want to put them in the realm of mysticism now. These are mystics who talk to animal spirits, and of course then you get to see in all the movies where they got these Native Americans and their animal spirits, and we get to see this wolf that comes out of nowhere, or the person turns into an antelope, or we don't need to do that. There's we got tangible facts. People sat around the fires with their families, napping rocks. They take a piece of leather and put it on their leg, and they'd take that stone and they'd knock out a big chunk into, you know, big enough to work into a stone piece. Now, there's a lot of different local arrows that a lot of people wouldn't even be aware of. I mean, there's rocks that it's just a rock, and that's all it was. But it was absolutely an arrow. It was for, basically hitting a bird. You want to make sure that you're going to hit the bird. Another thing that was done was, the splaying of the end of something. The Japanese and the Chinese, they did the same thing for fishing spears. You take bamboo and you cut it, from the top so that it splays out, so that it's basically a bunch of really long splinters, and that's how you use it. And you're not going to find much evidence of those. There's a few parts of Nebraska where it's just been incredibly dry for so long, and it's just sand that's on top of the stuff, so eventually it does blow away or blow over. And then you get some stuff that's exposed for, a few days max, because, like, once it's exposed to the weather, once it gets rained on a couple of times, it's done for. Once the sand starts sandblasting it because it's windy as shit in Nebraska, it's done for. And it's just wood and feathers, and by that point, the feathers are usually gone anyway. Um, with Rory Jepson and everything that he did in Deuel County, I mean, you've got Sedgwick, Colorado. If you look that place up, look at how many places have Sedgwick in them, or Julesburg, Colorado. Those are both, in a lot of cowboy movies. Big Springs, same thing. Cowboy movies. Now it's racist redneckville. So, if you're not a racist redneck, it's probably not the best place to move. And it's probably not the best place to raise kids. A lot of people that I know that are not racist rednecks, they go, it really is really a nice place to raise your kids if it weren't for all the racists. They're right. Rory was a pretty alright guy. He was a lot more multicultural than a Nebraskan has any right to be. I am more of an asshole than he is or was. But that's one of the things he prided himself on, was being an asshole. He said, "You know what? I'm not an asshole. I'm really not. I'm not an asshole. But if you make me be an asshole, I am an asshole. I will be that asshole." Was he a mean-hearted person? Fuck no. This guy was a gentle giant. And sure, he wasn't super tall, and he wasn't like fat and behemoth, anything like that. He was taller than me. He had back issues. He went to work. He busted his ass to take care of his family. He was interested in a lot of really cool things, and one of those things is, well, I'm not sure if you guys have been paying real close attention to all these folks trying to take away everybody's guns and make sure only the cops and the military have them. I don't know how to express to you how bad of an idea that is. They're unchecked. They're already unchecked. The police, especially within the United States, we have a lot of proof and evidence that they're going completely unchecked. The only thing that forces anything to be done is what the public cares about. If the news tells the public to care about something, the public looks at it because that's what the news is showing them. Much like advertisements. When you see the advertisement for an Almond Joy 30 times a week, you're going to think about Almond Joys a lot more than if you, well, never saw any commercials with them. The same thing goes for all this senseless crap that we're going through today. We got to warn everybody about everything, and absolutely we should. But we should also sell the truth. Matter of fact, don't sell it. It's the truth, tell it. You shouldn't demand a profit for doing the right thing. That's just stupidity. Rory helped me out a lot, gave me a lot of tools. Sean Jepson helped me a lot, gave me a lot of tools. Gary Jepson helped me a lot, gave me a lot of tools. I dug a lot of tools out of their dumpsters. I fixed a lot of them. That's how I ended up with some of my first sets of tools. Now, all of this, why is it important? Why? Why is it important that these flecks that Rory found, these buckets and buckets and buckets of stone chips, why is it important that he found these around fires? Why is it important that he found even bones in some of those fires? These are fire pits. Why is it that he was able to tell the difference between a Native American fire pit and a settler's fire pit? Some of the fire pits out there, all you're going to find is a very thin layer of coal or charcoal that's kind of in the shape of a bowl. Now, when you wipe away the surface, you might not see it at first because of what's blown over on top over the years. But once you get down to it and you see a ring, you see a black ring or a gray ring. I'll do it like this, although it's much bigger. That gray ring is part of a bowl. That bowl is a fire pit, and at the bottom of the fire pit, that gray ring or black ring that's all the way around on the surface of the top, as you sweep it away, that ring will shrink down further and further and further, and then of course you get to the bottom where it's this thick and it's black because it was a bowl. And I don't mean like a bowl for eating out of, I mean it was a pit that they dug and just burned in the pit. And out in Nebraska, that's actually a really good way to do it, especially when you're looking at the possibility of grass fires. And the primary thing that you have for burning is grass, because it was a prairie state. There's no trees there unless people put them there. On the east end of the state, yeah, there's trees, but the west end, no. It's just grass. He was a humanitarian. Rory certainly was. And he loved to learn, and he loved to teach as well. I mean, he spent so much time teaching people about the cultures that were in Deuel County before we got there, and he was never an actual teacher. He was just in love with history and Deuel County, and his best friend Jeff. I don't mean literally in love like boyfriend, girlfriend. I mean, with all those things, those were his passions. Mm. When politicians want to talk about family values, I want to look at the situation this morning. I want to look at how many resources it took. How many people they paid to stand around like fucking idiots. And how it helped Dean. Move along or we'll take all your shit. Your shit's broke? Fine, we'll fucking steal it. You guys are alright with it. You just don't want to see them. You want them gone. They're not your problem. They're not your problem. Aren't those the police's problem? You think that shit this morning was fucking moral? We don't want to see that. Well, fuck you. Nobody's making you look. Why do you care about looks so fucking much? How much garbage have I picked up in this fucking parking lot? Did I pick it up yesterday? No, I left it right where the fuck it was. It was fucking hot. Starting to warm up a little now, too. That family culture back then, same as now. It's not just your brothers and your sisters and your mom and your dad. It's the village raising the children. Pretty well out in the open, too. People of the ancient world, a lot more astute than you might think. They traveled a lot more than you might think. They traded a lot more than you might think. Here in the United States, we have found a few very, very, very old trails, both in North America as well as the compacted chalk trails in, I believe it's Mexico and Peru, or the other locations. And it said that these roads are better than what the Romans built. And the Roman roads, as we all know, are, well, the most longest lasting roads in Europe. Roman roads were far better than Greek roads. We need to stop selling this crap about how, because the Catholic Church destroyed all the Aztec and Inca and Mayan writings and all that, claiming that it's the devil, that there's no way to get that history back. And that's absolutely untrue. We're picking up that history. We're picking up a lot of it, but we need to give that history back to the people that it belongs to. At this point, that history does belong to all of us. We're all here. We're all one big family, one large tribe, whether we want to be or not. Whether our neighbor is our brother or sister, or whether it's a complete and total stranger, it's entirely up to us, actually. A lot of people want to throw the Bible in my face. There's something I always wanted to explain to folks. We're all brothers and sisters. We really are. We are all related. We're humans. We're all the same species. Just like a breed of dogs, it starts off with two. Every single beagle that you will ever see, every single one of them, come from somewhere. I wish I knew where my scissors were. Same thing with horses. All horses belong to the same genus, Equus. I might have that incorrect. I'm not really good with remembering all that scientific genus and species and all that shit, but Equus is the modern horse. Or God, what is it? Equine. Equine. Even the 4 or 5 ancient breeds of horses that we have, they're still a part of that order or whatever. That's why I'm not a scientist. I don't care what order or genus or species it is. What the fuck did it do? What did it do? What did it eat? Was it a flesh eater? Was it a plant eater? Did it stick its butt and its tail straight up in the air and dive its head down into the water and all the algae at the bottom of the pool? What did it do? And same thing with Rory. When he wanted to bring up the stuff that he brought up, he's like, they got all this stuff on Ancient Aliens, and I watch that stuff, and every time I watch it, I'm like, if they would just leave the aliens out. And a lot of that makes sense to me. I've watched two or three different episodes of Ancient Aliens. Why is it so hard for people to believe that human beings can do that? Why is it so difficult to believe that a human being thousands of years ago could have figured out how to do something that you can't? Most of the shit that you know is inherited wealth. You know what inherited wealth is, right? All those spoiled rich boys that you know, you're like, man, fucking he's driving around in a Maserati. His daddy's rich. Yep, you're right. That's inherited wealth. He had that shit handed to him. Donald Trump had it handed to him. Oh, he worked for that. No, he got $1 million loan. Okay, who gets $1 million loan from their daddy? But also, knowledge is wealth. Most of our tools come from knowledge of our ancestors. The fact that there are many, many examples of native folks in this country using squares. I don't mean the shape square, but I mean the tool, a square. And there are also a lot of other geometric shapes that we've found evidence of that are possibly dwellings. Maybe not, they were made out of wood, whatever was there. We find the post holes. That's where American archaeology becomes difficult, because Americans love bones, they love the dinosaurs. They don't think about what else they might be destroying in the process of looking for that shit. Or even how to. Now, there's a Chinese chariot. It was buried over 2,000 years ago. And they unburied this thing, and all that was left was discoloration. Well, what they did is they basically swept away the part that was not discolored until the shape of whatever the item was there for everyone to see. It turned out it was chariots. Many of them. Uh, we've got this thing in our head that makes us not think that these people in the past were still people. I want you to look at a Roman house and a Roman dressing, the clothing that they wear. And I want you to imagine what you went through this morning with your family, just in a different house with different clothes. And some of y'all parents are like, well, the Romans didn't have iPads. The Romans didn't have phones that they could look this stuff up on instantaneously, and you're absolutely right. Their kids were not glued to their phones. They were glued to a piece of wax and a piece of wood. That's what they wrote with. And if they weren't stuck to that, they were stuck to their labor. It depended on who you were. You might live in a beautiful palatial villa. You might live in a sardine can with 10 other individuals, none of which you know. Or you might live in a tent with the Roman army, and your family are just your followers or hangers-on. There's different rules that they had at the time, but you also had ways past those rules. You couldn't get married if you were a Roman soldier. But that was during the Marius age. I mean, after Marius, there was a lot that was changed. We could see how Native American cultures and ancient Stone Age cultures of Europe and Asia, and of course Africa as well, we could see how all these places had those tools. They had the tricks of the trade. They had, well, long distance trading. And they did so as a cohesive family unit in nearly all these situations and cases. The culture that we have here, there's a lot of folks who would just rather pretend that that history doesn't exist because they're ashamed of what's been done to the native folks. And how the hell is it that after all these years with the American people screaming for some semblance of humanity, that we haven't given them, well, land back that we stole in treaties? Yeah, we probably have to kick some other people off of land that we have now given to quote unquote white people. They're not all white. Just so you know, not all the people who move to those towns and live in them are white. But that's the general consensus, and that is pretty well how it's sold today. Because if you say, "Oh well, those poor Native Americans, we need to give them their land back," and then it's all their land first of all, and second of all, um, we're not going to get rid of everybody. But there's a lot of places where they're just asking for the treaty agreements to be allotted and to be allowed. I mean, we signed treaties all over the United States for there to be reservations that, well, they're all tiny. And that history for those natives, a lot of that is collected by quote unquote white people like Rory, who just has a love and fascination for people. Of course, he's dead now, but that information is still handy. These guys are right. You guys are right. We don't matter. Those of us without family, we don't matter. When you complain about how well Hispanic people are doing, it's because you got this thing called jealousy. You see that what they got going on is working, but you didn't have a family that did that. Your family didn't work together like that. Your family didn't actually love each other. Your family were taught that every man for himself. No, absolutely not. You are your brother's keeper. Am I my brother's keeper? I'd better be. Who else is going to do it? Not you. You're just going to watch. You're not going to say a word. You're not going to record it. You're not going to try to do anything about the situation. The most pathetic part of all of this is that from most of these people I needed help from, I just needed their words from day one. When they hadn't come forward with that to the public for 6 months or a year, and then they sent me money, I knew what was going to happen. I knew that they were going to throw it in my face that they had sent me $50 or $100. That's good money, isn't it? And I should be glad to have it. Well, I wouldn't have needed the money if they'd have just spoken up. We can give a lot of people their land back. If the federal judge doesn't give a shit, a federal judge wants to decide I don't give a shit what the law says. I don't give a shit. If we can't give these folks back at least the original treaty arranged land, and they're stuck on 1/3 to 1/5 of that quantity of land now, that is not acceptable. Absolutely not. The other thing is, it wasn't white people who built the towns that are in there now. That wasn't white people, okay? It was just people. It don't matter what color they are, they're dwellings. There's a lot of folks on them reservations. It's not that they don't have the professional skills to do these things. It's not that they don't have the ability. Well, they don't have the ability. Most of them have the skills. They don't have the materials. They don't have the income. And we put them on land where they have to be dependent upon an income. And they have to be dependent upon income that we give them. I think that we should dig up the past. Absolutely. You shouldn't bring up the past. You shouldn't go digging around in the past. That's exactly where we should be going digging. What we get thrown at us today is this BS about all these native folks that are, well, obviously they're all alcoholics. They're all drug dealers. They're all in gangs. Are you sure about that? You know what? A family unit, a cohesive family unit, isn't a gang. It can be called a gang or construed as a gang or misrepresented as a gang, but when has hanging out with your family or defending your family ever been a gang activity? If somebody is beating on your little sister, yeah, you don't want to watch that happen. Do something about it. Anyway, those of you who got arrowheads, it'd be nice if you go get them tested and see where those rocks came from originally. Most of those rocks are smaller pieces of bigger formations, most generally the exterior of those formations. In the instance of caves and the like, it's not, that's an exception, of course, but most of the time it's like here at Hood River. You got to see in some of my videos where the rocks are cracking and jagged, and you've got to see some of the ones that are kind of in between, and then you get to see the ones that are rounded. You get to see, different sizes of them, of course. Well, every one of those round rocks that was down there came from somewhere originally. Those rocks started off millions of years ago not being round. Alright, I suppose I should end this video. I just trying to get rid of anxiety, and I don't have anyone to talk to about it. So you guys got to hear about Rory. And hopefully a little bit of history. A family unit is what keeps you safe. You get to hear those cops. They asked him if he has those resources. They claim that they tried to work with him before, and I don't have any evidence of that. I haven't seen it. They claim that they were willing to help him fix his vehicle. Well, did they do that, or did they tow the fucking thing? If I hadn't been there with the camera, they would have gotten a bit of a gruff voice, possibly talked over him 3 or 4 at a time. Of course, I did have the camera, so they didn't do those things. So I can't say those things, right? Those of us out here, the black sheep, were the victims of our families who told. were the ones who told on our disgusting Uncle Troy, or our daddy Ted. Were the ones that told on the other kids who couldn't keep their hands to themselves. And where did those kids learn those things? Most of the time from their parents, sometimes from older siblings. Every time somebody who was touched inappropriately and didn't understand the boundaries at that point in life. These are children, for shit's sake. Y'all like to pass the buck. I was in the system getting sexually assaulted by children who were victims themselves. That's where they learned that. So then they're locked up for having anger problems. No, they had problems with mom and dad not touching them right. When they try to tell in group, the person who's in charge of the group usually calls off, whatever the person is saying and says, oh, we can talk about this in a private session. And that all comes back to the mandated reporter stuff. Every one of us who grew up in the system, we know this mandated reporter stuff. We have it shoved down our throats our entire lives. And then, of course, our entire lives, it doesn't work. The entirety of our lives, it doesn't work. The family unit is an important unit. It is important that you, white Americans, start learning something from Hispanic culture, from Latin culture. Start learning something from Native culture. And stop shitting on your fucking families. Idiots.